Okay, so in 6.6, we have just spent all this time factoring. 6.1 to 6.5 is factoring. So we are going to use this skill, this factoring skill, to actually solve a quadratic equation. So when you solve a quadratic equation, okay, when you solve any equation, you're actually figuring out where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, a quadratic function is a function whose highest exponent is a 2. Okay, so x squared. All right, so we're figuring out where it crosses the x-axis, which means we're finding an x-intercept. So if we look at these x-intercepts, they have one thing in common, and that is that the y-coordinate is 0. Okay. You'll see a whole bunch of different names for these, but they all mean the same thing: finding a root, a 0, a solution, or an x-intercept. So the way that I'm going to show you today, okay, this is the expectation for today, is called the zero product property, or zero factor property. What this means, if I give you an equation that looks like this, oops, not highlight. Let's say I give you 5x equals 0. I said, okay, solve for x. Well, if we divide using what we know about zeros, we know that x has to be 0, right? Well, what if I gave you x times y equals 0? Okay, knowing what I know about 0 on how multiplying by 0 gets a 0, then I know that either this x is a 0 or that y is a 0, or both of them. This is the zero product property. All right, so the first thing we want to do is make sure that the equation actually equals 0. Okay? So that means on this particular problem, I'm going to subtract this 2x. Okay, that's first step. Get it to equal 0. Then I want to factor the equation, but check for that GCF first. This particular one has a GCF of x. If you take the GCF out and you no longer have an x squared, you're done factoring. Okay, and you're going to set both factors. That's step 4 now. Use the zero product property and set each factor equal to 0. You have two factors, x minus 6. So you set both factors equal to 0. Well, one of them is already solved. X is 0. The other one, I would add 6. So x equals 6. Two possible solutions here. Get the equation to equal 0. So I'm going to add the 4x. I'm going to do a couple of steps at once. I'm also going to go ahead and add the 8. So that's actually going to cancel too. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0. So I have 2x squared minus 16x equals 0. All right, it's got a GCF of 2x. And now that I've taken that GCF out, it's no longer quadratic. I don't have an x squared anymore, which means I can go ahead and set my factors. We have 2x, x minus 8. Set them equal to 0 and solve them. So we divide by 2. So x is 0. Add 8. X is 8. So we have two solutions here. All right, get this function to equal 0. We're going to add 5. Okay, so we get to this point. I've got x squared minus 9, and there's no GCF. But you only have two terms, and it is still quadratic. Okay, it's got an x squared. Okay, so that means I'm looking for things like a difference of squares. If you remember, that's a difference of squares. A squared minus b squared equals a plus b, a minus b. Okay, so I want to double check. I've got a subtraction sign. Okay, x squared has an even exponent, so it's a square. And then 9, is there a number times itself that gives you a 9? Yeah, that's a square too. We'll take their square roots. And we add them and subtract them. Okay, well now it's no longer quadratic. I don't have any more squares. So I have that factor and this factor. I'm going to set them both equal to 0. Subtract 3 or add 3. So my solutions are either negative 3 or positive 3. All right, let's get this equation to equal 0. I'm going to add x squared. All right, no GCF on this one, okay? But it is still quadratic. And we have 3 terms. So I'm going to multiply that leading coefficient by that constant. This is what we did in 6.5 and in 6.4 and in 6.3 and in 6.2. So multiply A times B. List your factor pairs. All right, it has to multiply to negative 14, but add to 13. So if I have a positive B, so it's a positive middle term, and a negative C, which is the constant, then I need the little factor to be negative. Now, which factor pair adds together to be positive 13? That's negative 1 and 14. Okay, so we put your x here. And we're going to take that positive 13x and we're going to break it up. So negative 1x and positive 14x. Group the first 2 and the last 2, just like I showed you in 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5. You want your GCF of the first group, that's x. Bring down that plus sign. GCF of the second group is a 7. Common binomial factor. And then what goes in the second parentheses is your x plus 7. Now it's no longer quadratic. I no longer see the x squared. So I am done factoring. So I have factor number 1, 2x minus 1. Factor 2, x plus 7. Set them equal to 0. So on 2x minus 1, I'm going to add the 1. And divide by 2. And on x plus 7, I'm going to subtract the 7. So our 2 solutions are positive 1/2 and negative 7. All right, x squared minus 15x. Okay, we got a whole bunch of stuff going on, but the equation has to equal 0 first. So we're going to add 2x, add 2, add 2x, add 2 to make those equal 0. So x squared minus 13x plus 30. All right, no GCF, 3 terms, and it's quadratic. Gotta factor this. Leading coefficient is 1. We're gonna multiply it by 30. Factor pairs of 30. Okay, so it's gotta multiply to 30. Add to negative 13. Okay, so that b is a negative number, but that c is positive. So to get a positive number when you multiply, but negative when you add, both factors are negative. Which pair adds together to be a negative 13? That's negative 3 and negative 10. So break it up, negative 3x, negative 10x. And just like I showed you to do for 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, and 6.5, group the first two and the last two. GCF of the first group is an x. Bring down that minus sign, and GCF of the second group is a 10. So that's going to make that a positive x and a negative 3. Common binomial factor. And then our second set is the x minus 10. So now that I've factored it out, I no longer see the square, so I can't go any further. Factor 1, factor 2, set them equal to 0, and solve by adding 3 and by adding 10. Okay, moving on to example 6. Get it to equal 0 by subtracting 14x and 18. So 2x squared, that's going to be minus 8x, and that's going to be minus 24. All right, this one does have a GCF of 2, so I want to go ahead and take that out. But taking that GCF out still left a quadratic. It's still left a square. Okay, so I'm going to factor the inside. I'm going to ignore that 2. We're just going to factor the inside. Leading coefficient's 1. Constant's negative 12. So we're going to multiply 1 by negative 12. Factor pairs. So it's got to multiply to negative 12. But add to negative 4. So this time we have a negative b and a negative c. This means the big factor is negative. So the 12, the 6, and the 4. All right, you're looking for the factor pair that adds together to be a negative 4. And that's 2 and negative 6. I'm going to put those x's in there. Break up that negative 4. Ignore your GCF for the moment. I don't need it right now. Group, just like I told you, in 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, and 6.5. GCF of the don't know why I keep zooming in so much. GCF of the second group. Bring down that minus sign, and it is a 6. Common binomial factor. And then our second set is the x minus 6. Okay, and then that GCF, bring it down. So technically, I have 1, 2, 3 factors. How many of those actually have a variable? That one and that one. To have a solution, the factor must have a variable. If your factor does not have a variable, it does not have a solution. So this 2 does not have a variable. It does not have a solution. X plus 2 has a variable. It has a solution. It's negative 2. X minus 6 has a variable. So it has a solution. X equals 6. Your factor has to have a variable to have a solution. All right, subtract 2x. You want it to equal 0. No GCF, 6, 17, and negative 13, or negative 3 don't have any GCFs. Leading coefficient 6, constant negative 3. Factor pairs. So it has to multiply to negative 18. Add to positive 17. So remember, positive b, negative c is little factor negative. And the factor pair that adds to 17 is negative 1 and positive 18. So we break it up. Group, just like I told you before. First two, last two. GCF of the first group is x. Second group, bring down that plus sign, is 3. Common binomial factor. And then x plus 3. Factor number 1. Factor number 2. Both have variables. Both have solutions. So add 1. Divide by 6. It's okay if your answer is a fraction. Subtract 3. All right, moving on. Get this equation equals 0. Kind of skip this step. We're going to subtract 3 from both sides. Now, your leading term must be positive. Okay, that means I'm going to factor out a negative 1 here. Now we're going to multiply leading coefficient by constant. So that's a positive 4 times a positive 3. Factor pairs. So it's got to multiply to 12, but add to negative 8. Oh, it's a negative b, positive c, so this means both negative. Negative 2 and negative 6 add to negative 8. Break it. I'm going to ignore the negative 1 for the moment. I don't need it. Your first two and your last two. GCF of my first group. Bring down that minus sign. GCF of the second group is 3. Common binomial. Two x minus 3 is left. Okay, and that GCF we took out, it goes in the front. Technically, I have 1, 2, 3 factors. But I mentioned before, to have a solution, the factor must have a variable. So this negative 1 doesn't have a variable, it doesn't have a solution. The other two have variables, the other two have solutions. Add 1, divide by 2. Add 3. Divide by 2. All right, example 9. This function already equals 0, so that is at least one thing in our favor. It does also have a GCF. First, we see the 2, because 2, 6, and 56 are even, but they also share an x. So the GCF is not just 2, it's 2x. Now, I factored it, but I still have an x squared left, so we need to factor it again. Leading coefficient is 1, constant negative 28. So factor pairs. All right, so it has to multiply to negative 28, but add to negative 3. So remember, negative b, negative c is big factor negative. And the factor pair that adds together to be negative 3 is 4 and negative 7. Ignore the 2x for the moment. I'm going to group the first 2 and the last 2. GCF for the first group is x. Second group is negative 7. Common binomial factor. And then x minus 7 is your other factor. All right, and don't forget the original GCF. All right, so what I have going on here, factor 1, factor 2, factor 3. For a factor to have a solution, it must have a variable. 2x has a variable, which means it has a solution. X plus 4 has a variable. It has a solution. X minus 7 has a variable. It has a solution. So x equals 0. X equals negative 4. X equals 7. Okay, last one. Subtract your 3x, add your 4. So 6x squared minus 11x plus 4. No GCF. Multiply 6 by 4. Factor pairs. It's got to multiply to 24, but add to negative 11. So it's negative b, positive c. This is both negative. Which factor pair adds to be negative 11? That's negative 8, or negative 3 and negative 8. Group. GCF. Bring down that minus sign you see there. It's subtle, but it's there. Common binomial. Whatever is left. I didn't have a GCF to begin with, so factor 1, factor 2, both have variables, both have solutions. Add 1, we get a lot of 1/2s. Add 4, divide by 3.